All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good day. My name is Dominic Haig of Agilist Software. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. It is now right on the hour by my watch, so let's get started. So the subject today is about current challenges in software license management. And what we've done, as you can see here, what we plan on doing, give you a quick overview of Agilist, and then talk through what are we hearing coming back from our customers as we're talking to them, prospective users, and so on, as to what are the things that are at the top of their minds and the issues they're most concerned about. So these are the ones that bubbled up, if you will, out of the lots of interactions with customers over the past year. Issues such as how do you automate node locking, how do you deal with large enterprise customers, how do you deal with virtualization, how do you deal with supporting a number of different licensing scenarios for different types of end customers, and then on the operations side, how do you deal with making that smoother, more effective, more convenient for your customers. Now, what we plan on doing is I'll talk through these, go to a little demonstration at the end, and then as time allows, I'll be happy to go through questions. As you have a question, do please feel free to enter it into there's a questions panel you should see on your control bar. If you can enter your question there, and then we'll come to those as time allows. And if we don't have time for all of your questions, don't worry, we'll make sure we do answer them by email after the webinar is over. Also, just to forestall the most popular question, yes, we will be sending you access to this presentation. So it will be a follow-up email that gives you access to this presentation. We're also making a recording of this webinar. So let me dive in, just give you a quick picture about Agilist and who we are. Whoops, in fact, correction. Let me start by talking. Let's get some feedback from you. Start by just asking you about the licensing issues that you're facing now. So let me pop this up on the. You should see this coming up on your screen. There you go. So, which of these issues are you facing now? Feel free to select as many of these as apply to you. Just go ahead and click on those. Let me pop that up for you. So you should see that now coming up. So if you would please take a few moments, and let me talk through these again to be clear what I'm talking about. By automating node locking, I mean doing node locking in automatic fashion, typically called product activation. So you're not asking your customer to send you any information about their system that your software is to run on, but it's when they install your application, it's automatically locked to that machine. By enterprise licensing, I mean that if somebody has 10 or 15 or 50 or 100 licenses from you, how do you manage that in a straightforward way that's convenient for you and for them? How do you deal with virtualization? So if people want to run on virtual systems, how do you ensure that they're not getting many instances of your application running? How do you support perhaps node-locked single desktop licenses and then also floating licenses for larger customers, all within the same licensing system? And then in terms of operations, number 5 is how do you, a couple of issues arise there, which is how can you automate operations perhaps by automatically issuing licenses out of your back office system. Also, if you currently have an existing licensing system, how can you smoothly transition from that over time? Perhaps you might have a number of different licensing systems that you've acquired over time. So I'll give you a few more seconds to go through and click on as many of those as you feel apply to you now, or that will apply to you perhaps in the coming, let's say in the coming year. Let's make that the period. So give you a few more seconds, and I'll pop that up so you can see what those answers were. Another few seconds coming up. Okay, so so you see the most popular one was automating node locking, then it was supporting node locked and floating enterprise licensing, and then automating operations. Okay, all right, interesting. Okay, good. Well, let me go back to here. One second, let me moment. Let's close out that poll. There we go. And get back up to here. Okay, so thank you for that. Interesting. Okay. All right. Now let's move on, talk about a bit about Agilist software. So first of all, who we are, we're an 8-year-old California company. Our business is license management. That's our exclusive focus. That's what we've been doing from day one. And the good question is, what do you at Agilist bring to the party, given that there are a number of different companies who have been doing this for decades? And based on the feedback we receive, it is that essentially we were able to take a clean sheet approach to software licensing. So we've developed our solutions for a world, as I hope you'll see, where we have the internet and wide area networks and VPNs and firewalls and all these different things. However, you can't assume network connectivity. It's not a world of small, highly reliable local area networks, but of all kinds of disparate network topologies. But you want to make maximum use of whatever network connection may or may not be available. There are a number of standards we use out there, Java in particular. Our client communication is built on HTTP, for example. And of all the things that we pay attention to, security and flexibility and scalability, as I hope you'll see then, ease of use for you as our direct customers and for your end customers as the users of products protected with Agilist's solutions, is something we pay particular attention to. And over those years, we've acquired several hundred customers around the world. Some of them are listed on our website in all kinds of industries. The largest category, obviously, is software developers, but also people doing embedded systems, large hardware, software systems, and so on. People such as the US Navy, Harris, Lockheed Martin, Fujitsu, Level 3 Communications, STL in the Netherlands, Orc Software, a number all across around the world. And while we don't always know where the end applications are going, which are being protected by our solutions, we do know there are some Agilist protected applications working in some very demanding end customer environments in terms of network access and security and so on. So inside organizations such as the US National Security Agency, the South Korean and Israeli defense organizations, big banks such as ING and Nomura, Bloomberg, and so on. And the solutions we offer are several. Our Easy Licenser License Manager, which is used generally in lower volume applications where a more manual process is fine. For network-based licensing or internet-based product activation, then Orion is our solution. And with Orion, you can both manage licenses from a license server hosted on the internet. You can also install the Orion server on your end customer's network for managing licenses over their internal network. If you're doing internet-hosted licensing, you can certainly have the Orion server in your own data center. If you want us to take care of that for you, we offer our Acropolis on-demand managed licensing service. So that's a hosted licensing service we provide out of a Tier 1 data center, and we could have that turned on for you this afternoon, up and running. And then finally, our Acropolis Integration Manager, or AIM, is our solution for license lifecycle management. Again, it's a hosted service that lets you manage the operations of how you issue licenses, upgrade them, how you do reporting, how you perhaps have different people from your own organization, your resellers, and so on, issuing licenses from around the world. Okay, let's talk about node locking and dive straight into one of the most common issues people are wrestling with today, which is you want to do node locking. That is, you want to make sure that a license will only run on a given machine and can't just be copied over onto as many different machines as the customer wants. The traditional process to doing this, which is manual, where somebody sends you information about their machine, you can perhaps encrypt that information in a key, which you send to them. It's time-consuming, it adds work for you and for the user, and it's error-prone because the end customer can mistype ones and L's and zeros and O's and so forth. So what are some of the solutions for that? The first, obviously, the biggest chunk bite of that out of that is taken by product activation, where you're automatically enabling and node locking licenses from a hosted license server. However, you do need to be aware of other things, such as what do you do where there is not a network connection. So what happens on disconnected systems, and we'll talk a bit about that. And there are some other couple of approaches, such as deferred node locking and user self-service node locking that I'll talk about. But the biggest, most popular solution today is what we call product activation. So let me talk about that. And let me start with the simplest, most, if you will, vanilla scenario, where you have the protected application. It could be a desktop application, could be a server application. And let's assume for the moment there is a network connection to the license server. And as drawn, this license server is hosted on the internet. Could equally well, in the case of Orion, could equally well be a license server that's installed on your own customer's network. It's just a different deployment scenario as far as Orion is concerned. It's no difference in terms of the executable, the application, the integration, and so on. So let's walk through this process. So somebody orders a license from you. You get the order, you set up a license for them in the Orion server, and you set it up under a unique product serial number. And that product serial number, it's not a key, it's just a unique identifying string. And it can be whatever you want. It can have semantics to it if you want or not, doesn't matter. And you would set up that license and you'd specify the limits you want to apply to that user. A 30-day trial license, a 1-year subscription license, how features are configured, usage limits, and so forth. All you then need to send to the customer is an email saying, thank you very much for your order, perhaps here's where you download the software, and here is the product serial number you'll need to activate your license. So they go ahead, they install your software, whatever your standard process might be, and they're then prompted to enter that product serial number, which is needed before the application will run. So they perhaps copy and paste that out of the email. What then happens is that the Orion client that's built into that application connects to the Orion server, asks, is this a valid product serial number that hasn't previously been used to activate a license, and what are the limits I'm to apply to this user? It also reads from the machine it's running on, what are the parameters of that machine that license is to be locked to? MAC address, host ID, hard disk ID, whatever combination of parameters it might be. And those license limits and the node locking parameters are encrypted and saved in a local hidden file that we call the activation record. So each time after that the application runs, it calls the Orion license checking client that finds the activation record, decrypts it, interrogates it, checks it's running on the correct machine, and informs the application of the license limits within which it's to operate. So a number of things happened under the covers, but as far as the user is concerned, they placed an order, they received an email, they installed your application, they pasted in this product serial number, and a few hundred milliseconds later they're done, and the application carries on working on that machine within the limits they'd purchased with no further communication required with an outside system. So what are some of the key benefits of this as far as you and your users are concerned? First of all, you can support many different kinds of license models, trial subscription, you can be configuring features, you can be setting usage limits and so forth as you wish. On connected systems, the activation, the node locking is automatic, and the mechanism we provide is called fuzzy fingerprinting, which has a couple of capabilities. First is it's extensible, so you can add whatever node locking parameters into that mix that you want. So if you have custom hardware in there with its own serial number, you want to lock to particular hardware features, you can do that. And the fuzzy fingerprinting mechanism itself is designed to deal with the issue where perhaps you activate a license and you lock it to, say, 3 parameters of the user's machine, but then at some later date, there is a minor change to that system. The user does a minor system upgrade, causing one of those parameters to change. With fuzzy fingerprinting, you can specify that you want the node locking to pass if, say, any 2 out of the 3 parameters, when you check them at runtime, match the names you recorded at activation time. So you can provide some resiliency against minor system upgrades and still keep it secure. You can also do things such as manage maintenance and support subscriptions if you want to track that, be getting reports on when maintenance is about to expire, for example, so your inside sales can go and chase people down to renew. There's a provision for things such as manual license return. If somebody, they call you up and say, how my machine crashed, how do I get my license back? There's a mechanism within Orion letting you to be able to free up their license so they can go and activate it on a new machine. So you can deal with the help my system crashed scenario. You can do secure licensing via resellers or partners. Generally, if you're going through channels, distribution partners, OEM partners, and so on, essentially the issue is that you may want to delegate fulfillment, day-to-day fulfillment of orders to your partner, but you want to know what they're doing and what licenses they've activated. And Orion lets you do that. You can allow your channel partner to do the day-to-day fulfillment, but there's a record in the Orion server of all the licenses that they've activated. If you want to, you can allow your users to relocate their licenses. This is a first-class operation with Orion, so you control whether a given user is allowed to relocate their license and how often they can do so. So the user can just call a deactivation command, which disables the software on that machine and informs the Orion server that license has been deactivated, so you can then go and activate it on a different system, perhaps move their license from their laptop to their desktop and so on. And there is a user briefcase, so you can automatically transfer user settings, set up parameters, and so on. So, for example, you could arrange that when somebody relocates their license, that when they start it up on the new machine, it comes up in the same state as they'd left it on the old machine, that they don't have to set up put all their settings in again. There is the option for data upload and download at activation time. So, for example, if you're selling via reseller, the common way this is used is to capture user registration information at activation time so you can know who your reseller's customers are. For example, you can be capturing name, company, email address, and so on. You can set up licenses to be revocable if you want to have that ability. So if you have a customer where you're uncertain about their credit standing, things such as that, then you can arrange to set up the license. So at any point you can, if you will, reach in and revoke their license, and so it'll stop working. There are provision for email alerts, there's built-in reporting. I won't go into this in detail, just give you an idea, but you can be getting alerts on licensing events, you can be exporting reports on licenses activated, and so on. As I mentioned, also the Orion server doesn't have to be hosted. It can be installed on your end customer's network, and you can be managing licenses purely over your customer's internal network. But again, where an end user can activate a license, take it off on their laptop. Once it's activated, they don't need any further network connection for it to carry on running. And finally, the same mechanism, the same server, the same client also supports floating licensing from either a hosted or a redistributed server if you wanted to move into that. So all good reasons for going for product activation. But then what happens if you don't have a network connection? You can't assume that. You can't assume that users will always have a network connection. They could have a disconnected internal network. Network could be down, heavy-duty firewalls, and so forth. And there are several mechanisms for dealing with that. The primary one is what we call SneakerNet, and I'll talk about that. And there's some other mechanisms too, such as licensing via proxy servers that I'll mention briefly. But let me dive in, talk primarily about SneakerNet. So same mechanism, same setup as before. There's the user system. It's just in this case there's no network connection to the server. Again, as drawn, it's a hosted server. Could equally well be a server running on your end customer's network. So the user's got their product serial number. They've entered it. The Orion client finds it can't connect to the server. So it takes that product serial number and it reads the locking parameters from the machine it's running on, and it encrypts those and saves it in what we call the fingerprint file. The user can then take that file, save it onto some transportable medium, thumb drive, whatever it is, walk it over to any computer that does have network access, and upload it at the self-service web page for the Orion server. So the Orion server accepts that fingerprint file, it validates it. If it is a valid license request, the Orion server generates that activation record, which encrypts the license limits and the locking parameters and so forth on the fly, and it generates that on the fly and returns it to the user, who can then walk it back over to their machine. So you end up with exactly the same outcome as for a connected machine, which is that it's fully automatic from the point of view of the independent software vendor. From your point of view, it's obviously on demand, 24/7, global, as far as the user is concerned. It's secure, and there is a batch mode available if somebody has a number of machines to do in one operation. And an obvious extension of this is the user could email that fingerprint file to your operations people who generate the activation record and send it back, or even snail mail it. But generally, our customers find if somebody has access to email, then they can get to a web browser screen and just do it themselves. Also, there is an analogous process for the deactivation of licenses on disconnected machines. So in that case, what's generated is what we call a deactivation certificate file, which the user can upload or they can send to the software vendor, and that provides proof that that license hasn't in fact been deactivated. So that's SneakerNet, which is the primary mechanism. Now, the other scenario you might run into is where you have a customer that has an isolated internal network, but they may have what's sometimes called DMZ machines, which have both internal and external network access. And that gives you a couple of options. That there is direct client-side support in Orion for forward HTTP proxy servers. So if there is an appropriate proxy server on a DMZ machine, then the users can be activating and relocating licenses on that internal network just as though they had direct external access to the server. If there isn't a suitable proxy server available, then part of the Orion package is the Orion license proxy server. So you can install that on their DMZ machine, and that will route the activations, deactivations, and so on between the internal network and the license server. So again, that can all happen just as though they had network access. Now, just to cover the corner cases, there are a couple of other options. The first of which, and this actually came up with a customer of ours who said, well, we're installing software on base stations which might be in the middle of the desert, so we can't assume that there is any network access or email or anything for 100 miles. How do we do a node locker license? And in this case, they're locking to a custom parameter on that base station, so they know what that serial number is. What you can do is actually use a utility that Agilist provides to generate the activation record straight away without needing to get any information from the end user system. And you can then take that file, put it on a laptop, put it on a thumb drive, however you want, take it and install it on the machine. So this, in fact, is the analogy analogous to the old style key-based licensing, where you know ahead of time what those locking parameters are to cover that corner case where there is just no way of getting information back in a reasonable time from the target machine. Now, another option is doing dongle or hardware key-based licensing. And one of the advantages of Orion, it lets you do all this while staying within the same framework, the same licensing solution, or the same licensing flexibility. In this case, what you do is you find some suitable hardware component that has a unique readable signature. And one of the things I know our customers are using are things that's just as a simple USB Ethernet module. So what you do is generate the activation record that is locked to the MAC address of that specific Ethernet module, and then you send that the activation record and that USB Ethernet module to the customer, and they plug that in, and that functions as a dongle. So providing a unique hardware signature, so that the combination of that, your application and that activation record, will only run on a machine that has that particular piece of hardware plugged into it. So you can use any piece of hardware to do this that you like. But I say that's a common one, is just using that Ethernet module. Okay, now there is another approach, again for sort of covering the corner cases here, that's available with our Easy Licenser License Manager, and this is what we call deferred node locking. So that's where you generate a very special kind of key, which, when it's installed, will read the parameters of the machine it's running on, and then on the fly will lock itself to that machine. So the locking is done automatically, but it's a one-way process. You send somebody the key, they install it, it locks itself. And generally, people do that where that key itself has a shelf life of a few days, a week, whatever it might be. This does have some advantages, that it's obviously very straightforward for the user, no opportunities for error. You don't need any network connection. It can be an entirely disconnected type approach. You can also be doing deferred time-limited licensing, where when you install the key, it would also enable perhaps a 30-day license or a 1-year license. It's only suitable for particular scenarios, though, because there is a security issue that within its lifetime that that key can be used obviously on more than one machine, because there's no check on the number of times it's used, because it's a disconnected type approach. Okay, let me come back to our second survey question and let's get some feedback from you, if I may. So let's go to for node lock licensing. So let me ask, which of these approaches do you think would be your requirement? Again, please do select all those that apply. So the first is the activation from a hosted server, including both the connected and the SneakerNet type approach. activation by the proxy server, where there's either an already installed HTTP proxy server or the Orion license proxy server. That approach, there's pre-generating keys where you set them up ahead of time, dongle-based licensing, or finally the deferred node locking with the Easy Licenser that I mentioned. So please go ahead and click away on there and let me know which of those you think will apply to you. And again, pick as many as you think will be needed, because you may have different requirements for different customers, for different end market segments, different users, and so on. So I'll give you a few moments to go ahead and do that. So answers are coming in. Do go ahead. Give you a few more seconds. So another few seconds. Any more answers? Any more polls? People want to click away? A few more? Okay. So the top one is activation from a hosted server, with about 85% of you thinking you need to do that. Next one after that is the pre-generation of keys, and around 70%. Then a long way down to dongle-based licensing and activation via a proxy server and deferred node locking, and down in the tens of percent. So clearly, product activation, including SneakerNet, is the most the one you see having the most requirement for. Okay, interesting. Thank you. Okay, let me close that. All right. So that's all well and good. And what we've described so far is where you have you set up a product serial number, and that corresponds to a single license, which may be applicable for some set of your customers. But what about where you have enterprise customers where they have many licenses? If somebody buys, say, 10 licenses from you, maybe it's okay. Maybe it's fine that they have 10 different product serial numbers, and obviously you can do that. But maybe they buy 20, 30, 50, and they don't want to be tracking all those individual numbers. So what do you do there? And that's what we call enterprise licensing. So what you do there is where you have the product serial number, instead of applying to an individual license, in fact applies to a pool of some defined number of licenses, 50, 100, 10, 75, or whatever you want it to be. Product activations on it all happens exactly as before, as we covered. The automatic node locking, and there's the license limits you can set. And what Orion is going to do is ensure that there are not more than, say, for a pool with 25 licenses, Orion is going to ensure there are not more than 25 licenses activated out of that pool. But it means, as far as your customer sysadmin is concerned, they send the same activation credentials to every user. They don't need to track 25 different numbers. You can still do all the offline, the SneakerNet type activation, all that still applies. And we call this, the term we use internally for this is anonymous user licensing. It is anonymous in that there is not a pre-assignment of a given license to a given user. However, you can be capturing a username, so when somebody does activate a license, you and your sysadmin can know who has got a particular license. So it doesn't mean that once the license is activated that each installation is not known to the license server. And again, this could be on a hosted license server. It could be on a license server that's running on your customer's network. Okay, next issue, virtual systems. So the issue here is that I spoke about node locking. You lock to the MAC address, the disk ID, and so on. Clearly, if your people are running in a virtual session, then those parameters can change for a legitimate user. I know some of the licensing systems out there, they just say, well, let's just disallow people from running on a virtual system. But to us, that seems to be kind of against the grain of what you as a software vendor want. You want your user to be getting maximum value out of your product, so obviously as long as they remain within the terms of their license from you. So we let you do that. And what we suggest and what you do there is that you lock a couple of approaches. The first is that you lock to the invariant parameters of a particular session. There's a quote there from one of our customers at Blueprint Systems, that what they're doing is using the fuzzy fingerprinting mechanism to lock both the logical parameters, host name, login name, and so on. So it lets their users run on a virtual system, but it still ensures that there's only one instance active under a given license. So each instance requires one license to be able to run. So you can allow people to run on virtual systems, but still keep it secure. The other approach, as I mentioned, is what we call leased licensing. And for people who really want maximum security, and this is one scenario where that you might want maximum security, what you can do with Orion is you can say, well, somebody may have a perpetual license or a one-year license, whatever it is, and instead of just allowing a single activation event to enable that license for that one-year period or a perpetual license, what I want to do is to require that application to periodically revalidate its license against the server. And that's what we call leased licensing. And you can set up any leasing interval you want. It could be hours, days, it could be whatever is appropriate. So what that will do is that any activation event in that case is only going to be valid for that lease interval, and the Orion client is going to be going around opportunistically in the background and revalidating that license every whatever the period is, week, days, 2 weeks, month, whatever it is, to make absolutely sure that that is a valid, excuse me, they don't have a valid license. Okay, next issue. What about if you've got a range of customers? Often happens where people might have a range of different types of customers, where you have smaller customers who have a few desktop licenses or a server license. But then you might have enterprise customers who come to you and say, well, I want to have floating licensing of my internal network. I don't want any external access for licensing. I want to manage it all internally, but I want to have 15, 20, 50, whatever floating licenses over my internal network. No problem, as I've indicated earlier, that's just a different deployment scenario for Orion. So you can just say, fine, no problem, I can do that. How many do you need? And that can be done from either a hosted Orion server, or it can be done from a redistributed Orion server. And if you are putting an Orion server on your end customer's network, one of the benefits Orion brings over some of the older systems out there is that your end customer will only need one Orion server for their entire global wide area network, virtual private network, intranet, whatever it might be. Some things to think about, though, about hosting hosted floating licensing. It does have some advantages. First of which, obviously, there is no license server for your customers to even have to think about, that you're providing that, or Agilus is via our Acropolis service. Secondly, you have access to all their licensing activity data, so you can know what your customer is doing, if they're regularly hitting their license limit, perhaps what functions they're using in your software, and so on. You only need one server to manage all your different customers, both for activation and floating licensing. And of course, you can both upgrade their licenses and you can revoke them, because you're managing the server. So if you need to make any changes to their licensing, of either expanding and increasing their licensing, or reducing it, or revoking it completely, then you can do that. And there's a quote up there from another one of our customers. It's Numerics, who do analysis software in the financial space. And they adopted Orion. They wanted to do activation of subscription licenses. And they thought that would cover all their customer base. It turned out that there were a few customers who insisted on having the license be entirely internal to their own networks. So in that case, they were able to just go ahead and deploy the Orion server. And as I said, it was just a different deployment scenario, that their operations group didn't even need to go back to engineering to request any code changes. They could just do it themselves by deploying it in a different fashion. Okay. Next issue that often comes up is, okay, this is all great, but how can we do two things? How can we simplify operations, perhaps with a new licensing system such as Orion, but also what a lot of software companies have is a number of what we call legacy licensing systems. And the most common way these arise is if software companies have grown through acquisition. Perhaps each new acquisition brings either a commercial or an in-house developed older licensing system, and you end up with a number of different tools. So each time you want to issue a license for a product, you have to go and figure out which tool to use and different ways of managing it and so on. So it's a headache. And I think the record is one of our customers who said that they ended up with 80 different licensing systems across the company. So the solution there is what we call AIM, which is our on-demand license lifecycle management service. So what AIM is all about is of simplifying how you issue licenses, how you inform customers, how customers obtain their licenses, how you manage upgrades and report and so on. It's intended to be very easy to configure for new products. obviously reduces costs, simplifies operations. It does also support, as you'll see when we're talking about legacy keys, if you're using a licensing system which doesn't support automatic product activation, but where the user needs to supply you information about their machine before you can generate a license key, that it supports that. And the overall goal, as it says, is to consolidate disparate underlying licensing tools. In effect, to abstract out from whatever the underlying licensing technology might be. So your operations people, when they want to issue a license, they just go to the same portal, they just select the product they want, and they don't have to think about what the underlying licensing technology might be. So just the basic architecture of what's in the AIM system that's built on top of an Orion server. And up here at the top on the listener side, then there is the license generator web pages where your operations people or your resellers or enterprise customers can be logging in to call down licenses. And then you could also be automatically setting up licenses and informing customers out of your back office system, perhaps via web services to your CRM system, your e-commerce system, whatever it might be. And then on the bottom half, you'll see there are the key generators. Could be many. It's a pluggable architecture. You could be plugging in key generators for a current licensing system such as Easy Licenser or Orion, or for your legacy systems. You can be plugging in key generators for any number of legacy systems. And then finally, there's the email notifier, so you can be sending emails off to your, automatically off to your end users to let them know, here's your license, here's how you obtain it, and so on, and providing a custom web page so users can obtain perhaps download their license keys. So some of the key capabilities in the current version, which we're currently at version 2.0 with AIM, which is in limited production use, and I'll say in a moment what's coming up in the new version, which is imminent. Version 2.5 will be out very shortly. So some of the high points here that what you do is when say you're an operator and you're logged into AIM, to your custom portal, you're dealing at a business level. You're thinking about customers and license agreements and so on. You're not having to think about the details of the particular license generator. You can have different logins at different levels of admin authority. As I mentioned, you can cover many different types of licensing systems and abstract out from whatever the different underlying systems might be. It is designed to be quickly configured, so it's the portal you log into, it can be branded for you, it can be specific to your products. And as you'll see, this will come out as I'll get to the demo in about 5 or 10 minutes, but you can see that you're able to do things such as set up standard email templates. You can preview those and edit them before they go. You can do batches of licenses. So if somebody's getting, say, 5 different licenses from you, they don't need to get 5 emails. You can send one email with those 5 licenses all in the one email. You can update licenses. So if somebody adds a feature, extends a subscription license, you can select their previous license and update that. Or you can do cloning, which is where what we mean there is you're taking an existing license and using that as a starting point for a new license you're going to issue. So if you set up a license for somebody and then you're doing another one that's similar, you don't need to re-enter the previous data. You can take the first one as the starting point. So you can set up a login for your enterprise customers to pull licenses out of a pool, for example, if you set up a pool of licenses for a larger customer. And there's the browser-based key download, as I mentioned. So that's what's in the current version of 2.0. Some of the things we're bringing in 2.5, the new version, is at a high level. We're expanding the admin model, so you can have a number of different admin login levels with different levels of capability for you as the software vendor, for your resellers, for enterprise customers, all the way from at the top level a licensed admin who can do anything, down to a guest who's just allowed to review licenses and isn't allowed to issue any. You can set up access control lists, so certain logins are only allowed to see certain customers and products. All of the setup is going to self-service for you, so you can set up new products and so on as you want. Bringing in the web services interface and bulk data import and export. Coming down here in terms of language support, so if you've got customers around the world in different zones, different languages, then you can arrange to select which language you want, for example, the notification emails to go in. So you could say, well, this customer, I want them to get the notification email in French or in German or Spanish, whatever it might be. And then there's some where improving some of the tools, the reporting, and so on. So at this point, what I'd like to do is just ask a quick one more survey question, and then we'll go to a demonstration of AIM and give you a picture of that. So let me pull that up. So in terms of operational capabilities, which operational capabilities do you expect to need? So do you want to be able to automatically issue licenses out of your back office system? Do you want to allow resellers and partners to issue licenses, but obviously where you know all what they've done? Do you want your enterprise customers to be able to manage their own licenses? So perhaps set up a pool of maybe 20 licenses for somebody and let your enterprise customers, sysadmin, log in and manage that themselves. Do you want multi-language user communications? So do you want the customer-facing communications to be available in more than just English, perhaps in Spanish, French, German, whatever it might be? And do you want to support legacy licensing tools? So do you have existing licensing tools you'd like to integrate into a framework so your operations people only have to go to one place to issue licenses irrespective of whatever the underlying licensing tools might be? So I'll give you a few minutes to go ahead and look at that. And coming in the winner right now is automatically issuing licenses. Interesting, followed by enterprise customer self-management as the next most popular thing. Then legacy licensing tools, partners, and then multi-language at the bottom with voting in the 20s. But over 3/4 of you want to be able to automatically issue licenses, followed by about 60%, bit over 60% for allowing enterprise customers to manage their own licenses. Okay. A couple of minutes, any more votes to come in? Just give you a couple of seconds. There, any more? Going for any more? Okay. All right. Let me close that out. So, thank you. Thank you. It's interesting. So, what I want to do at this point is go to a demonstration. What I want to do is just log into an AIM screen and show you how what that might look like for, first of all, for doing a product activation type licensing scenario, and then for a floating licensing scenario where, by floating licensing, I mean where you have an Orion server running on your customer's premises, but that's a good model for how you'd get a license key to somebody. So let me go to here. So what you should see coming up is the AIM login screen. So what I'm going to do is log into a demo account we have set up here for a customer called Acme Software. So it's just a demo account that we have. And what you're going to see is the screens are customized to each particular user. So what you're going to see when I log into this Acme account are the screens we've set up and the products and so on we've set up for this user. So let's assume right now that I am an operations person for your company, and I've got a new license to set up for a new customer. So from any web browser, I've logged in with my login credentials. And the first thing I want to do here, the customer account panel, is, okay, so who's the customer I'm going to issue this license for? If they're an existing customer, I can just go ahead and pick them. Let's pick BigSoft, in which case there you go, it pulls up the contact information and so on, Joe Smith. If I wanted to, I could add a new customer and enter their credentials, but let's assume for the moment that we're going with an existing customer. And a construct supported by AIM is the idea that you might have a number of different license agreements with a big customer, perhaps with different locations or different divisions. So I can pick which license agreement I want to issue a license under, and I can look at the agreement details, for example, make sure I've got the right one. Okay, so I've got the customer and I've got the agreement I want to issue the license under. Next, I'm going to come down here and say, well, what's the type of license I want to issue? What's the product? And there could be many different products here. The one here, which is a simple single-user activation type scenario, is the small business license. So I'm going to issue a single license. So I'll come down here to the user license panel. Now, what I can do here, you see there's the product serial number field. If I just leave that blank, then AIM is going to automatically assign a new product serial number to this new license I'm issuing. What I can also do is just click on it and say, well, what are some of the licenses that were previously issued under this license agreement for this customer for this type of product? So I can call up this license that was issued that was, you see, valid until 9/15/2011, for example. I could pull up that one. I could then update this license. I could drop it. I could clone it, and so on, whatever I wanted to do. But let's assume I'm doing a new license. So I'll then, let me see, set an expiration date for this new license. Let me make that. Okay. Let me make that 1 year. And then here there's some other parameters, which are going to be entirely dependent on the product. They can be whatever you want. We set one up here called bandwidth limit. I have no idea what that means. It's just a parameter that forms part of the license. So this license will have a bandwidth limit of 25 gigabytes, whatever that means in this context. Okay, so I've set up the license I want. It all looks good to go, but I do want, I left it ticked, I want to preview the email. So let me go ahead and generate that license. And what it will do now, let me go up to here, give you the, I need to do a manipulation here. There we go. So here it's showing me the preview of the email. This is the standard email template. Dear Joe, a license has been generated with the following information. This is the email that's going to go. Here's the license information, 25 gigabyte bandwidth limit. Here are the instructions. When you install it, enter the product serial number. There it is. That's the one that was assigned by AIM. And if I want to, I can edit this. Perhaps I know Joe. I want to say, Dear Joe, thanks for this latest order, whatever it might be. And say, okay, that all looks good. That's going to go. So I'll say, all right, I'm going to send that email. So as far as me as the operations person, as far as I'm concerned, I'm done. I've issued the license. The email has gone to the customer, and that's all I needed to do. The customer's now going to get that email, and it's got the download instructions built into it. It's got their product serial number. They can go ahead and activate their license. So that's the straightforward product activation scenario. Now, what happens if you have a scenario where instead of it being activation, where the customer needs to download and obtain some kind of license key? And this could be where they have an Orion server running on their premises and they need to get the license key to load into that server to enable licenses in that server. It could be a legacy licensing system that's key-based, where there's a key generator plugin that's built into AIM, so the AIM is going to generate that license key. So that type of model is what we're calling up here the distributed floating license. So you see I changed the product type, and the parameters down here in the user license panel changed because a different set of parameters apply to this new product I called up. So again, let's make the license expiration, let's make it a 1-year license. Let's make it a user limit of 12, bandwidth limit, let's make it 35, whatever it might be in this case. Okay. Now, this scenario is where the user is going to download a license key. So there's a further control built into AIM, which is you can set how many times the user can download that key and what their window is for doing so. In this case, they have 3 days for doing so. They could have 3 weeks, whatever you want that to be. So they have a certain window within which they can download that key as an additional security measure. So okay, I say, oh, that all looks good. All right. So I'm going to generate that license. Again, I get to preview the email. So I'm going to just send that email. Now, so again, as the operator, I'm done. What I wanted to do is, in this case, to show you now what the end user does. So, so I'm the end user, and let me go to that screen. So let me refresh that. So this is actually the account to which that email was sent. And you see here, license availability notification for Acme Desktop distributed. It came out at 8:48. Okay. So I'm now the user. I've received this email that has my instructions in it. So open up the email. Dear Joe, we created a license key for you. Here are the details: 35 gigabyte bandwidth limit, use 12 limit, and the instructions on what I do. And it says I'm to click on this link. So okay, I'll go ahead and click on that link. And what that does is it takes me to a custom download page where the product serial number that identifies this license is automatically entered in this box. Now, then there's a box here which is where I, as the user, can enter specific information that's needed to generate this key. When you're generating an Orion license, you need to know the service name. So it might be there was a BigSoft, maybe that's what I called the service name. If it's a legacy system, let's say you're locking to the MAC address, maybe you need to know the MAC address before you can generate that and incorporate it into the key. So you'd have a box up here that says MAC address and maybe some instructions on how you go and find out what that is. So what AIM lets you do is to request information from the user at the point at which they're about to download their key. And the advantage of that is the person who's downloading the key is the one who's most likely to know what that information is. If you try and get it at the time the customer places the order, the order might be being placed by a buyer or an admin who has no idea what system that license is going to run on. But the person who's downloading the key is most likely to know. So when I say, okay, yes, download product key, what AIM is going to do is combine the license limit information that was set up by the software vendor, by the sales operator, together with this information entered at the last minute by the end customer, and then generate the key on the fly. So I say download product key. There you go. It's generated my key. I can save the file and load it into the system. So this key, you see here the name up here, .xml, incorporates both the license limit information set up by the vendor and the node locking information entered at the last minute by the user. Okay, so let me then go back. That was what I wanted to give you the picture of about AIMS. Let me just pop back to here. What I wanted to do is just ask you one last question. Let me go to that one. So, of the solutions we've described in this webinar, I'll come to questions in a moment. How applicable do you think these are to the kinds of issues that you're dealing with now? So, are they something you'd like to deal with straight away? Is it something you think would meet your needs perhaps within the next short period, longer term, more than a year, or is this something that either doesn't do what you're looking for, or is something that your interest was just general only? So please go ahead and pick one of those, and we get those answers in. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. So as you have questions, do please feel free to shoot them up. So there's a question here about how do you protect the license state and the hidden activation record, and how do we secure that? Interesting question. Let me say a bit more about the activation record, which, if you recall, is that encrypted hidden file which is placed on the automatically generated and kept on the target machine. Now, that hidden file, first of all, it's a mutable file. You can change it. So you can be securely tracking activation state, your application state locally to the target machine over time in that activation record. And in fact, there is a case study up on our website of a company called Fair Isaac, who do the credit analysis stuff for FICO score and so on. That's Fair Isaac, and they're using Orion in just this way to sell a very interesting kind of license. That they sell a license which is it's a quarterly usage-based license. And what they're doing is the customer activates the license for the quarter, and then while they're using it, then a number of different usage counters are being tracked in that activation record locally to each machine, keeping track of how many times different functions within their analysis software are being used. Then at the end of the quarter, when they in fact do a sneakernet reactivation for the new quarter, that activity data, that usage data, is uploaded to the Orion server, and Fair Isaac can then export it and generate their invoice and so on. Now, the way that they're making absolutely sure that that activation record is not tampered with or rolled back to an archived version and so on is there's a mechanism in there where we have master-slave hidden files, which are in fact have to be updated synchronously. So they're keeping those hidden master and slave hidden files are keeping track of each other, making it extremely hard for anybody to roll back or to go to an older version and so on of that activation record. So we protect the state of that activation record. And there are mechanisms in there also for protecting that the clock hasn't been rolled back, that you haven't gone back to an older timestamped version of the file and so on. But an important point is that we're doing all of this while remaining within sound computer principles of all doing file access all via the operating system and so forth. So what we're not trying to do, which is what some other vendors out there do, which is they're trying to bypass the operating system right directly to tracks on the disk and things such as that, which violates some pretty well-established computer principles and open you up to all kinds of problems. So I hope that answers that question. Other questions? Question about the platforms, the client platforms we support for the protected applications. So we support several. For Java applications, our Java client is multi-platform Java, so it supports any Java-capable platform. We also supply C++ clients for 32 and 64-bit Windows, Linux, and Solaris, and Mac OS X, and for any programming language that can make calls out to C, such as Fortran and Delphi and so on. and we provide an ActiveX client. Other questions? Actually, let me go back to the poll. Now people have had a chance to answer that. Good. So 43% was in the next short period. After that was interest or education only, and then in the 15, 20 or so was straight away or more than one year. Okay, so good. I wanted to give you the feedback on what those what that looked like. Okay. Other questions? There was one. Oh, what about the Orion server? If you want to host the Orion server, let me tell you about that. So the Orion server comes with a ready configured application server and its own database. It is in fact also a multi-platform Java, so runs on any Java-capable platform, Windows, Linux, Solaris, whatever you want to run it on. Doesn't need a huge machine. Standard PC type platform is fine. And when we last benchmarked an Orion server on what was a standard PC platform a couple of years ago, then it could support million-plus type user populations, and typical throughput was in the sort of 60 to 80 activations per second. So a standard PC type platform is fine. Let me have a look here. Other questions? We've got a couple of minutes left. I'd like to take them if we can. Okay, one more. Time for perhaps one more question. The question was about doing feature licensing where you want to manage different features and apply licensing policies to different features within your application. So yeah, you can do that. Certainly that's what we call complex feature licensing. So for example, you could be licensing, maybe somebody gets, let me make up a model. Somebody has 20 licenses for your product, but they have 10 licenses for feature A, perhaps on a 30-day trial license, and they have 5 licenses for feature B at the professional level or whatever it is, shared amongst those 20 basic seats, if you will. So yeah, that's certainly a model that's supported by Orion, so you can do what we call complex feature licensing. Okay, we are about out of time, so I'd like to thank you very much for your time and attention. That, as I said, we'll be sending you the access to this presentation, and if there are any questions we didn't get to, then we'll answer those, or do feel free to send me questions there at the email that's up on the screen. Thank you very much for your time, and look forward to working with you. Hope you have a good day, or a good afternoon, or a good evening, whatever your time zone might be. Thank you.